Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Please like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow. Today I wanted to talk about a new, interesting conservation effort that I read about in Ecological Entomology that was just recently published. But first, sorry about the voice. I've been fairly sick recently, so I'm a little raspier than usual. But an interesting paper has recently come out called Planting Native Wildflowers Improves Vacant Land as Bee Habitat in a Post-Industrial City. This paper was just recently published, I believe maybe in the January issue of Ecological Entomology, and it explores turning kind of blighted land in hollowed out Rust Belt cities in the US into little conservation projects. So first, to talk about bee conservation and pollinator conservation, there's been a lot of public interest in bee conservation over the last 20 years. If you will remember, this all kind of got sparked by colony collapse disorder and that whole scare of an issue way back when. And this inspired a boom in urban beekeeping, including things like rooftop apiaries in New York and other major cities. But these sorts of efforts have several issues. One, urban apiaries require lots of upkeep. If you've never kept bees, they do require you to keep an eye on them. Hives can be extremely heavy. You may need help moving things around, stuff like that. Bees need to be checked for parasites. Sometimes they need to be fed. And enthusiasm for such things tends to taper down after a big boom in interest. Two, large metro areas which see booms in apiaries also encounter the problem of failure to thrive in the bees because there aren't enough pollen and nectar sources to support an abundance of hives. This can be seen in Slovenia in Europe. This is the beekeeping capital of the world. And there are serious issues with too many bees, really. Too many hives in an area that can't be supported by the local amount of flowers. And this results in a need to artificially feed the bees sugar and pollen and bee cakes, things like that, because otherwise the hives will all die. This is an issue that arises when you have too many bees in one place. And three, in the US, honeybees are an introduced species. While we need them for a lot of agricultural reasons, when we talk about the greater issues of bee conservation, we're usually referring to the thousands of native bee species. Many of them are not hive forming species that are native to the continent and which don't really benefit from these urban beekeeping or pollinator initiatives. If anything, an overabundance of European honeybees tends to drive out many of the native species. So enter this work by Michelle Pham et al. From The Ohio State University and what they're calling pocket prairies. I don't think they're the first people to call it that, but I love that name, the little pocket prairies. And this work is based out of Cleveland, Ohio, where this was all done. And it's super, I'm not going to say novel because I don't think they're the first ones to do this, but it is very interesting and it's kind of hopeful. So the study was to examine the role of native wildflower plantings on vacant lots in what they're calling these post-industrial cities as a habitat for bees and other pollinators. And what they mean by a post-industrial city are these large cities, primarily in the Rust Belt and going up into New England, which have been basically de-industrialized and largely de-urbanized because of people leaving the city and abandoning property. So think of something like Detroit, where you once had a lot of really nice homes. People just left the city, abandoned these properties without selling them, and the houses or buildings or whatever fell into ruin. Sometimes they were cleared out, sometimes they weren't, and frequently you're left with blighted land. In Cleveland, a lot of these properties are taken over by the city or land management agencies, which then tear down the buildings and then mow down the land like every month. And so all that's left there are fescue grasses and weeds, functionally. The researchers tried to transform these vacant lots into habitats for pollinators, and the goal was to determine whether or not creating these quote-unquote pocket prairies, which were small plots that had been reseeded with native wildflowers and other native plants, along with any sort of weeds that came growing in naturally, onto these vacant plots would enhance bee diversity and abundance, especially compared to vacant lots, or ideally compared to managed parks in the suburbs or these managed vacant lands in the suburbs. The researchers established and monitored pocket prairies in 2014, which you can see on these maps. So what you have here in the squares on the exterior here, you have these are kind of the managed suburban parks or managed suburban grassland areas in the squares. And then on the interior here in downtown Cleveland, you have the circles and the triangles. The circles are the pocket prairies and the triangles are the vacant lots. And they were comparing the abundance of the bees on these lots in 2019. And this was 5 years after replanting the pocket prairies with all of these native wildflowers. So they planted everything, waited 5 years, and then did the sampling. So the researchers established these pocket prairies in 2014, and then they had kind of dual controls. They had the vacant lots, the unaltered vacant lots, and then they had these metro park suburban grasslands to act as the additional control. And then they were sampled during the summer of 2019 using traps and hand vacuums. So as results, almost 1,100 bees were collected in 2019. There were across all of these sites, representing 24 genera and 81 species. If you want to know what these lands end up looking like, this image here in A is a vacant lot, and it's mostly just grass and a handful of weeds because they're mowed down every month. Mowing is terrible for conservation efforts just because a lot of these flowering plants that you want take longer time to grow than 1 month. So if you're constantly mowing them down, all you're really left with are the rapid growing plants, which tend to be weeds. B here is a pocket prairie. So these are all of the native wildflowers that have been planted and allowed to grow over the last 5 years. And C is what these Metro Park managed grasslands look like. These are the suburban park grasslands that they were using as a fundamental control. So like I was saying, almost 1,100 bees were collected across all of these spots. And the Metro Park grasslands and pocket prairies ended up hosting more bees than the vacant lots, which you would kind of expect. And also it's great. That's what you want to find out. So these breeding initiatives for pollinators are definitely something that can work. Researchers also found that the pocket prairies played an essential role in increasing foraging behavior and changing the foraging behavior of the bees that were present. Initially, the bees only really wanted to go to the plants that they were familiar with. So these are kind of like the flowering weeds that they're seeing all over the urban lots. But eventually, bees actually learn a new host to go to if they're particularly productive. So eventually, the bees were going from only 5% interest in these wildflowers to 60% interest in these wildflowers. So it definitely changed their pollinating behavior. These wildflowers ended up providing a better source of pollen and a better source of nectar. So overall, they're beneficial. Although the Metro Park grasslands did support more species than the pocket prairies, they maintained a similar abundance in the number of bees actually found. This indicates that even small-scale wildflower plantings in urban environments can support pollinator populations, even compared to a large natural or semi-natural grassland habitat. You can see in this data here, this is data from the paper, that MG is the Metro Park managed grasslands, PP is the pocket prairies, and VL is the vacant lot. You can see that there is statistically similar abundances between the Metro Park grasslands and the pocket prairies. You can see that there is similar species richness. You can see there is a difference in bee diversity, the number of bee species present, but you can also see that the pocket prairies are doing better than the vacant lots. No specialist species were found. There overall was a good generalist abundance. These are generalist pollinators or generalist bee pollinators compared to the vacant lots. There were no differences in soil nesting abundance. In fact, they found that the denser the plantings, the worse the soil nesting abundance. And this is thought to be because the density of the plants tends to block the ability of the bees to get to the soil in order to build a nest. Although there was good native bee abundance compared to the vacant lots, there was also really good alien species abundance. And this is probably because of the nature of the fragmented habitat of these pocket prairies. There are a lot of native species that don't do well with fragmented habitats, so you kind of naturally select for more alien species that do well with fragmentation of habitats. The study suggests that vacant land can be repurposed for this conservation effort, which is a great idea because no one wants to have to constantly look on these vacant lots. Frequently, they're blighted or not taken very good care of. And overall, having these sorts of prairies, like you see here in B, would just generally improve the look of any of these neighborhoods. I'm sure most people would prefer to live next to B than to A, but one of the issues is that these sorts of pocket prairies require more long-term maintenance. You can't just mow them every month and expect them to do well. They will need to be reseeded occasionally, things like that. And so this is something that people will have to pay attention to. You might be able to get, the local neighborhoods to take care of them, but the city might have to step in and make sure that they don't get accidentally destroyed. And so something as simple as just planting native wildflowers on empty lots can have large-scale impacts on the number and type of species that are present. I'm sure this would also benefit other pollinators like syrphid flies or butterflies and moths within the area. So this is something that you can actually do within your own neighborhood. If there are kind of public lots or vacant lots around you, you can always find areas that aren't heavily mowed and just plant native wildflowers there. Many states will send you or for free packets of native wildflower seeds for you to plant. So keep an eye out for that in your area, and I'll talk to you guys later.